Welcome everyone to this session on business dynamic analysis. If you've been to a couple of sessions before, the logistics will be familiar, but just in case you haven't, presenters will each get 20 minutes to present their slides and then 10 minutes for Q&A. If you would like to ask a question, we'd ask you to just put it in the Q&A box. And if your question is selected, I will call out your name and you'll be able to unmute yourself and ask your question yourself. The only thing we'd ask is if you could please introduce yourself before asking the question. And with that, I will hand over the floor to our first presenter, Erik Bartelsman from the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam and Tinberg. I hope I didn't butcher this too much, Erik.
No, that's perfect. Thank you, Jakob, and thank you for the hosts for inviting me to this conference. The session that I got put in, I guess it makes sense given the work I often do. Today's presentation, however, is going to be quite different. There's not going to be much economic content per se. Now, I am happy that there are a lot of ONS people probably participating. I've seen a few names I've seen. Hello, Rebecca. Hello, Richard. And I hope I don't miss too many. They just fly by. So my talk today is about something that's been under development, I'd say, for 20 years or so. And I think we're making a bit of a leap, and it has to do with cross-country analysis of firm-level microdata. So let me just share my slides, and we'll go from there. Can everyone see the slides? All right, so this, I'm giving the presentation, but really we're in this with a large team. One is that there's an EU-funded H2020 project called MicroProd. The economic content there is to try to understand the productivity slowdown in the context of digitization and globalization. And we started up before COVID, and now, of course, we're also chasing down some of the same issues that we'll see in this session. Then I list here on the slide the MDI team. This is a group mostly of postdocs and PhD students working together from various European organizations where we've been collaborating on GitHub, fully electronic. We hope it stays that way after the fact. And so thanks to all of them for participating. And I hope when I'm done with this talk that people realize they can join in this list and get something truly collaborative going. So let me just start with the pitch of what we're doing. I'm trying to sell this idea of microdata infrastructure to do cross-country firm-level data analysis. So have you ever spent months munging data before running your first analysis? Or have you worried that even though you've got a universe of firms or 10 million observations, that this may not actually solve selectivity and endogeneity issues? Certainly not the endogeneity, but also selection can be a problem. Have you ever wondered if your findings hold in other contexts or in other countries? Call it the external validity argument. And again, you've got the universe of firms. You think, well, what external validity? But maybe there are other areas and other places where things work differently, and it'd be good to understand and good to know. Have you ever struggled to draw conclusions from a large body of what I would say are non-reproducible micro studies? You can't send the data to the journal. Often you don't send the code. Even if someone gets the code and tries to rerun things, the statistical agency will have changed the way the data sets are laid out. Plus, you have to spend months learning the ropes. So this is a problem for someone, a policymaker or someone involved in collating information about what are we learning as a profession. That there's many firm level studies, but it's really hard to do the comparisons or to do the meta-analysis. So wouldn't it be nice to have science move forward a little bit more rapidly? And I'd invite people to join in this endeavor to build a collaborative workspace for this kind of work. So here's a picture. I'm going to do the whole talk at the hand of some pictures. Here's kind of a picture of the traditional single researcher getting hold of longitudinal microdata, referred to as LMD further in the slides. So you've got some research idea. You might have to write a proposal to get access to your NSI's firm level data. You've got access procedures, paying the fees, signing up. In the Netherlands, for example, you have to do a secrecy course to show that you know the ropes of what is confidentiality, et cetera. There are technical restrictions, using dongles, using closed laptops, having to travel to a certain location, computer systems that limit the software you can use. There's a huge learning curve on the data and the problems of the data and decisions you have to make about how to clean, how to organize, what to take as truth and what to throw away. These decisions and data handling are enormous, but you're all done. You've written your code. You've run it through a business register linked to local activity units, linked to some financial data. You get your disclosure-free output. You run your program code on that, and you get your publication. And again, the problem is it reproducible? Is it comparable across studies with all the choices you've made? Is it really transparent what you've done? And did you really solve identification? That's more of my thoughts, that having cross-country variation, and for example, if you're doing policy work, having cross-country differences in timing and extent and choices of policies gives you a lot of exogenous variation to help identify drivers, especially policy drivers of things that you may be interested on firm dynamics or growth. The NSIs in this also have to do a lot of work. They've got to collect the access fees, but no, they have to actually maintain these data sets. They need to do disclosure analysis, and often they deliver some form or other of research support. Again, this varies greatly across countries where these setups are different. But now if you're a researcher and you want to do what you've done in 4 or 5 different countries, or even 2 countries, it's really difficult. You've got to run through all of these things again. And that's where the problem comes in. Even if the underlying data sets might not be identical, they're often close enough where it can be made to look alike. But the work involved is just too onerous. So if you want to do cross-country data, so top left corner, single country longitudinal microdata. We can't stack this stuff because it's confidential. It doesn't come out of the basement of the statistical agency. Orbis does, but that's hard to link with other sources, for example, on trade or on innovation or on R&D or on capital or investment, et cetera. So it doesn't get there. Instead, what we've done is you get your national accounts to make you sectoral or industry level data. Some organization collects that and makes it cross-country comparable. So EUCLEMS was such an endeavor, or STAN at the OECD does that. And you can create macro or sectoral indicators, but then you miss the micro detail and the identification that understanding firm behavior in the context of an economic environment doesn't get you there. And so for this, people at the OECD, DINEMP, I think was one group, or the multi-prod was another one. At the ECB, something called CompNet. They've been involved, and I've been involved in this for 20 years or so, generating moments from each country's microdata, call it micro moments data, and enhancing the EUCLEMS country industry year panels with information about the distributions and joint distributions of variables, entry and exit rates, et cetera. So CompNet data set, tons and tons of moments pulled from microdata in about 14 countries, lets you merge that with other industry data. Okay, do analysis. The way that looks, the CompNet setup, or the OECD DINEMP multi-prod, and I think they've got another round going now. The way that works is there's 3 types of actors involved. Let me just pull up some notes for myself. There's the researchers. Think of this, it could be individual academic researchers. It also could be central banks, ministries of finance, European director generals. Someone has a research question, they'd like to have it answered across country. Right now, what happens is they're on the board and in meetings with the network, which is the CompNet team. And the CompNet team, based upon desires of the members, the researchers, comes up with program code CompNet contracts with NSIs or central banks that have the appropriate firm level data. And those NSIs run the code, let's say once a year, once every 9 months or so, there's a new update. And then we get this cross-country MMD table. Right now, I think we're on CompNet release 8, and I don't know what release the OECD is on right now. Researchers can then write their program code, hit up this cross-country table, which can be merged with other available statistics, and you make your publication. So there's the players here. The important part is the microdata. That's at the bottom underlying this LMD, but it could be multiple sources, registries, business registers, administrative sources, LinkedIn surveys. Catherine Abram last night talked about, getting satellite hookups into the pipelines, lots of whatever the sources are. And then for the new microdata infrastructure, we're gonna enhance the role of the network, change the role of the NSIs, and add what we call a toolkit for the microdata infrastructure. Okay, so let me go through that to the next slide and show you how we've enhanced the picture. I'm sorry, it looks a lot more complex, and it's, I don't quite know how to simplify it enough yet. This is my first stab at this. But the idea is that the researcher, or maybe a national productivity board or a central bank research department, has some research question, some research design. They go to this MDI network, one stop, and apply to run their code in, let's say, 5 NSIs. Maybe we'll have to set up a peer review for the proposals if there are too many, kind of limit how many of these research modules can be added. The network also can provide research support. It adds to that a set of tools, call it tools to analyze the longitudinal microdata, tools to help at the NSI to go through all the various sources. And then the NSIs also have a slightly changed role. In this new infrastructure, the NSIs make a contract with the MDI agency. They allow remote access to that NSI, or they remotely execute the code. They run it themselves. And I'll call it the launcher. So that's this thing that gets launched at each statistical agency once, twice, 3 times a year, some periodic time. The launcher takes with it modules from researchers. I have module 1 here. It could be multiple modules. The launcher works because the NSI has provided metadata that allows the MDI network to write one set of code that translates for each different statistical agency, goes through all those separate registers and files and sources, and harmonizes, cleans, redefines variables, and organizes to create what I'll call the virtual LMD, the virtual longitudinal microdata set. That VLMD then can be read by other parts of the researcher's module to create data that leaves the firewall of the statistical agency. So up above the LMD, somewhere between the LMD and the next disclosure-free data set, there's a statistical agency firewall where disclosure analysis is done. And then from that disclosure-free data, and I think this will be much less detailed than the CompNet or microprod type data sets. This could be as simple as, a list of regression coefficients, but it could be also maybe a set of moments that a researcher needs to calibrate a heterogeneous firm dynamic model. It could be something to do some structural modeling. The thing is, you don't have it for one country, you have it for a whole set of countries. And these disclosure-free harmonized outputs can be stacked into a multi-country data set. All right, so again, we've got the researchers, we've got the MDI and the microdata infrastructure, the NSIs. So we're in the process of writing up for our Eurostat, for our EU Horizon 2020 grant, one part is to write up how to set up this MDI. And so there are legal parts. The MDI needs to be legally authorized to remote access statistical agencies. These rules vary by country. Right now, we've got 6 countries. We've got the 4 Nordic, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Norway. We've got the Netherlands. We've got France. We're working on Germany. And we've started to work with Poland and Hungary, and that's going slowly. We're learning in each of these countries what are the legal requirements for someone to get access. So in the Netherlands, it needs to be a legal entity. It doesn't have to be in the Netherlands. In France, we have access. You also don't need to be in France. In Denmark, you need to be affiliated with a Danish research organization. I don't know what the ONS rules right now are, but we're working that out, and we're trying to create an organization that has legal authority to have access to each country's data. The MDI also needs the expertise to evaluate research proposals that they're feasible, that they fit in, that the danger of disclosure is vanishingly small, 10 to the -6th or something like that. And the MDI infrastructure has to be able to support analysis and coding. They have to be the coordinator for an open source development effort. So at the moment, with the 6 or 7 of us, we have a GitHub running, and we're all contributing and doing our little branches and adding to the work and keeping this thing up to date in R and in SAS. We're going to allow the users to write their modules also in R, SAS, and or Stata. I haven't quite figured out how to do that translation. We want to avoid the Stata going to the bottom part of this graph where we have all the different files. The Stata is pretty bad at organizing large data sets and merging them and cleaning them and things like that. So we want to use, and as a matter of fact, I'm a 30-year SAS veteran. I've been learning R the last 3 years. The R module data.table is blazing fast. Among big data proponents, it's up there with Spark.io and ClickHouse. I mean, it's the top of the charts in speed for database queries. For doing
Eric,
things,
just to let you know,
yes.
You have 5 minutes left.
Oh yeah, no problem. I'm slowly getting to the end. So again, we've got these different layers. We've got the different roles that different people have. The network is going to be not just the legal entity to allow the interface to the NSIs. They also have to be the one with the contacts with the customers, the researchers. I think in first instance, this will be quasi-governmental or slightly larger research groups that can get contract funding to do stuff. So think the national productivity boards, think the type of organization that Bart van Ark and Tony Venables are setting up, the productivity, that whole network. We can imagine them becoming members of this network, both for their expertise and their funding. At a certain point, we really would like to open this for academic researchers, and we hope that the marginal cost of something could be down to 4,000 or 5,000 euros to run your code in 5 countries. We're hoping to get down to that level. So that's the expertise of the microdata infrastructure, the legal characteristics it must have, and then the technical characteristics. I can just go through for 2 or 3 minutes on that. The LMD tools, I would say, are the types of things that I myself have used as a firm level researcher. So it's aggregation, correlation stuff, analysis for firm dynamics and entry and exit, a tool called DoProd that has 17 versions of productivity estimations nested in it. There's some great R code already done, and we're adding some more modules to it. And as people are, taking a step back and doing GMM again, we're adding all those GMM things. We're adding all the control functions. So this is the LMD tools will have the tools for the researcher. The NSI tools will have the tools for cleaning, merging, renaming, etc. The nice thing is that virtual LMD will look the same to the researcher, whichever country it's in. the rows and columns have the same identifiers, the same classifications, the same variable definitions, the same variable names. That virtual LMD will be identical in 2, 4, 6, 14 countries. So I think that is going to be really nice. And the way that works is through the metadata that each country delivers and the NSI tools, which have all this remapping and cleaning and merging. What we're also adding to this, and that's a large part of the cost in each country, is the disclosure analysis. Right now, if you want to take something out, for example, Statistics Netherlands, the remote access users have to pay each time they submit a batch to run through disclosure. We're actually have embedded the disclosure analysis inside the LMD tools. So if you're running regressions or doing correlations or doing aggregations and distributions, the code runs along in these aggregation modules and spits out the required information about what the final data item looks like and whether it can go through the disclosure filters at the NSI. So part of what we're going to have to do is negotiate with the NSIs that they start trusting our code. We're basing it partly on something called Argus, which stats agency. I don't know if ONS uses it, but others do. So anyway, this is in a nutshell what we're doing. What we would like is for users to contact us, both users with organizations that want to do this research and that can sign on to be member of this network, if possible, a funding and founding member, but also for individual researchers to help us build this library of the tools, but especially of the metadata and the knowledge of the microdata in each country, so that we can really learn from each other and can avoid the next generation, again, spending 6 months to a year learning the ropes of the microdata. So let me finish off with that.
Thank you, Eric. So please pop any questions in the chat. I think, well, oh, we already have the first question. Excellent. So Thomas Treeps, I hope I pronounced that correctly. If you could unmute yourself and ask a question.
So Tom, wait, you're asking Thomas to get on?
Yeah, I think he should be able to unmute himself now.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
My name is Thomas. I'm at Loughborough University. The question is, I mean, this is very interesting stuff, Eric. Are there no efforts by these national agencies to harmonize this type of data at the actual micro level?
All right. Yes, there are, but some people run away screaming. So Eurostat has regulations. For example, they have a regulation on the business register, which I think got signed in 1992. And somewhere in the next 15 years, most but not all statistical agencies run the business register as requested by Eurostat. Mostly, however, the Eurostat regulations are about statistical output. So definitions, concepts and definitions of statistical output. What does the statistical agency need to transmit to Eurostat? And that's usually, for example, value added at factor prices for a two-digit 60-sector list of industries. And that's what they need to send. And so the harmonization is done on statistical output, not on inputs. Some exceptions. The Community Innovation Survey was started from academia, from Yale, I think, long ago. And the statistical agencies took this on in a consortium and have run that fairly harmonized in the way they do it. The European ICT Use Survey is actually tightly harmonized, with the questions being exact 90% the same in countries. However, again, countries add variables, they change variables, they drop variables. Their sampling methods are very different. In some countries, firms are rotated in and out of the sample, and when they're in one, they're never in the other. So the chance of finding someone both in the CIS and the ICT survey is nil. And in other countries, they do it the other way. They put countries in a few surveys at the same time. So there are lots of details that are seriously not harmonized. And even within country, they don't understand that you want to get your metadata machine and human readable. So in the Netherlands, what I would call the structural business statistics, the microdata underlying what's called SBS, is split into files for each year, and all the NACE codes are split into around 40 different files. So there's, you know, there's about 400 different files you have to pull together, and sometimes the variables have capital letters, sometimes the small letters, and the documentation is all PDF, so not machine readable. It's quite staggering.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. We have another question from Tom Wickersham.
Hello. So you mentioned the OECD distributed microdata projects like Multiprod and Dynemp. I mean, this is something that we're currently engaged with feeding into from the ONS side. I was interested to know, like, what, if any, the differences are between the project you're talking about and the OECD's work, and yeah, any sort of comparison between the two.
Yeah, so I started this stuff at the OECD with Stefano Scarpetta back in 1999 or so, and Chiara has been really building this out. Great. There's a couple differences. I had the slide up, and I'll probably have to ship them again. One is that in the multiprod, you get specifications and code, and you at the statistical agency need to get your data set to map to what that code needs to run. So you at the agency are making together that LMD. So for Dynemp, for example, you need the age of the firm, and you need your 5-year moving window of entry and exit, and employment sizes, and the sizes are harmonized, et cetera. So the point is, the statistical agency needs to do all that work to make that data set fit for that code run. What we're doing here is really, we're automating your work. We're getting rid of your job. So we're trying to find out what are all the data sets that you need to link. And then it's not for Dynemp, but it's for some researcher's module. Someone else, not Chiara, someone else decides, I want to do this analysis. The MDI infrastructure specialists look at that, look at the metadata of all the data sets in all these different countries, and comes up with a way to run code at ONS, and maybe remote execution, remote access, but maybe it's remote execution that you will have to run that. But that goes through all your underlying files and pulls together that LMD as a virtual LMD that'll then run the analysis code. So it's grabbing a step further down into the bowels of the statistical agencies. In doing so, it's going to leave a huge set of documentation across countries of what's underlying this stuff. And it's also going to really speed up your work when someone else asks you to do something like this, because you're going to have code in R and in SAS with all the metadata that lets you zip together this stuff, because we've just been building tools for 20 years.
Okay, thank you. Eric, if I can just jump in with chair's privilege. So first of all, thanks for what's a very ambitious and hopefully useful project. Can you just say a little bit maybe about the timescale, you know, when you think that, you know, this will be available to?
So you know, I've been doing this for 25 years, slowly building. So from the OECD stuff, and then the CompNet of the ECB, which is very similar. We're now with our team working on these tools. So the basic tools are there. The basic idea is there, and we're running this. We're running pilots, and I guess a pilot we call a module. So we've got a pilot 1 running and a pilot 2, which we're about to launch next week. We're trying to do it in 2 languages, so there's complexity there, and we're trying to do it in 6 countries, so there's complexity there. If this works well, then we're ready to really roll out. And what does that mean? Getting people to help build our tools or add to our tools, getting people to add metadata, NSIs, to really document, you know, what's the name of the file, what are all the variables, what are all the definitions of the variables, how do they compare, you know, how does value added at factor prices, how can you create something to make that at market prices, what kind of rejiggering with macro data you need to do to remap. All that kind of knowledge needs to be codified. And a lot of it's been done through various people over the years, but never in kind of machine readable form. But the expertise is out there. So we hope when our H2020 ends in January, to have this organization partially funded and able to take on collaborators.
Thank you, Eric. And I think we're just on time to hand over to my ONS colleague, Emily Hobson, for the second presentation.
Thank you, Jakob. Just double checking everyone can see my screen. Brilliant,
Yes.
thank you.
Yeah.
So my name is Emily Hobson and I work for the Office for National Statistics. And today I'm going to take you through the end of the EU transition period, analysing the impact on UK businesses. The UK left the EU on the 31st of January 2020 and entered a transition period that ended on the 31st of December 2020. During most of the transition period, businesses across the UK have experienced significant impacts on their financial performance, workforce and resilience due to the economic and social impacts of the coronavirus pandemic. In the latter part of 2020, in the lead up to the transition period, it became important to understand the difference between the impact of the pandemic and the separate impact as a result of the transition period coming to an end, and identifying frictions and challenges in crucial cross-border activities between the UK and the EU as a result of any reached agreement. To understand the impact on businesses around the end of the transition period, the ONS's fortnightly Business Insights and Conditions Survey, otherwise known as BICS, was used to proactively gather and analyse additional information on a wide number of topics, in particular on themes such as end of EU transition preparedness, supply chains, stockpiling, external trade, and recruitment of workers. So just a bit of background on the BICS survey. The ONS implemented the Business Impact of COVID-19 survey in a matter of weeks, where traditionally the creation of new surveys can take 6 to 12 months. During a great time of uncertainty, it was essential to provide quick and coherent data on the impact of the pandemic, with data being used in real time by decision makers to identify the strategies needed to respond to the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the UK's economy and society. The voluntary fortnightly business survey has provided qualitative information on turnover, workforce, prices and trade, which has offered further insights around these business dynamics. Final results of each wave of BICS are published in the fortnightly bulletin, Business Insights and Impact on the UK Economy, and flash headline figures are presented in the weekly Coronavirus and the Latest Indicators for the UK Economy and Society publication. The name Business Impact of COVID-19 survey was chosen in March 2020 with no understanding of how long the pandemic would last or the impact the data collected from it would have on policymakers, government departments and users. In Wave 24, the name was changed to the Business Insights and Conditions Survey, as questions in the survey had extended to topics outside the scope of the pandemic. The sample size has also increased across the waves to improve our coverage of regions and different business sizes, to ensure the sample was more representative of all UK businesses. From Wave 17 onwards, our sample size is over 39,000 businesses. Collaboration within and outside the ONS is one of the reasons why BICS has been so successful. The BICS team have been working closely with the ONS trade team and the Department of International Trade to identify how best BICS can help understand the impact of the end of the EU transition period and have since added a wide range of questions to help capture evidence for their key policy areas. For example, on the 21st of December 2020, the French border was closed to UK flight due to concern of the spread of the UK variant. Collaborating with the Department of International Trade, questions surrounding this issue were deployed in the next wave of BICS within days. And on the 14th of January, 4 days after Wave 20 closed, we published results on exporting and importing challenges faced by businesses during that period. The Department of International Trade continues to use a wide range of BICS data in analysis and dashboards, and we work together to understand how to measure the impact of the UK leaving the EU, some of which will be covered in these slides today. We work together to understand what new requirements are needed from BICS. Using evidence from businesses responding to the Business Insights and Conditions Survey has provided a useful insight into some of the underlying causes of the movements in trade regarding the impact of EU exit and coronavirus on exporting and importing. The following slides will cover the analysis of the 20th of December 2020 to April 2021, which uses data from waves 21 to 29 of VIX. However, some caution should be taken when interpreting these results, as based on the specific routing of these questions means that only a small number of businesses may have responded. The graph on the screen shows the percentage of internationally trading businesses with 250 more employees reporting challenges in exporting or importing over time. We focus our analysis on larger businesses to reduce volatility created by smaller firms in questions with relatively low number of responses. The graph indicates that the proportion of larger businesses experiencing export challenges rose from December into January and then plateaued in February, while the proportion of larger businesses experiencing importing challenges also rose from December, however, continued to rise throughout February before plateauing in March. It also suggests that businesses are more likely to be experiencing an import challenge than an export challenge in April, with approximately 50 and 60% reporting an export and import challenge, respectively, in the latest wave. Looking at the responses from all internationally trading businesses, the top 5 challenges listed by businesses in early April were additional paperwork, customs duties or levies, change in transportation costs, disruption at the border, and a lack of haulers to transport goods or lack of logistics equipment. Additional paperwork was a response option introduced into the survey in January and has continuously been one of the highest challenges reported by most internationally trading businesses, with over 1 in 4 still reporting it as an import challenge at the beginning of April. The proportion of businesses reporting change in transportation costs and customs duties or levies as challenges has notably increased over time, with large jumps after the end of the EU transition period. The percentage of businesses reporting customs duties or levies as an import challenge increased 32 percentage points from December to April. As I mentioned earlier, on the 20th of December, many countries imposed border restrictions on the UK because of a new strain of the COVID-19 virus. During this period, 18% experienced exporting challenges through disruption at the UK border, and 8% experienced exporting challenges because of the destinatory countries changing their border restrictions. The graph on the screen shows that disruption at the border is still causing challenges for both importers and exporters at 11 and 25% respectively. The graph also shows that they're more likely to be experiencing an export challenge than an import challenge in April. Internationally trading businesses who reported challenges in exporting or importing were asked what were causing these challenges. Overall, we found that COVID-19 was the most common reason behind exporting and importing challenges in early December. At the start of the year, we see a significant shift away from COVID-19 to the end of the transition period as being the main cause of challenge. Identification of the end of the EU transition period as the main cause of challenges in exporting rose from 12% in December to 58% at the end of February, and on importing from 19% to 60% over the same period. Citations of the end of the transition period as a cause of export-import challenges soared in January and have continued to increase on the import side into February. The end of the EU transition period is 5 times more likely to be a cause of challenges in April compared with that in late December. The proportion reporting that their main challenge was exclusively COVID-19 fell from 33 to 8% for exporting and from 24 to 3% for importing from December to April. VIX has also captured the severity of disruption these challenges have caused. Overall, 9 in 10 internationally trading businesses who reported export or import challenges experienced some level of disruption. On the export side, the graph suggests that the severity of disruption has started to reduce after an increase from December, with severe disruption reaching a peak of 32% in January, before dropping to 18% at the end of February. Wave 26 saw a shift of businesses reporting severe disruption to moderate disruption. The latest wave of data shows a large proportion reporting low disruption than severe. The import challenges faced by businesses has also caused a large amount of disruption, with an increase in severe disruption from 17% in December to 26% in January. The graph shows it is almost just as likely for an exporter to experience severe disruption in April as in December, despite some improvements in February, while now it is more likely for an importer to experience severe disruption. The end of the EU transition period has not only affected businesses' exporting and importing ability, but it's also affected business supply chains and stock levels. The following slides focus on the period October 2020 to May 2021. The BICS data indicates that there's an increase in the proportion of businesses not permanently ceased trading that have made changes to supply chains due to the end of the EU transition period, with 4% of businesses reporting they had made changes in April. The corresponding figures for the wholesale retail trade industry and the manufacturing industry were at 10% and 9% respectively. Of the 4% of businesses who reported making changes to supply chains due to the end of the EU transition period, the top 3 changes were using more UK suppliers, increasing the diversity in suppliers, and using more non-EU suppliers at 68, 23, and 10% respectively. With regards to stock levels of currently trading businesses, estimates from BICS indicate that stock levels were highest around mid-December, where 12% of businesses' stock levels were higher than normal. Stock levels peaked for the manufacturing industry in early December, with 27% of businesses within that industry citing that their stock levels were higher than normal. This gradually tailed off throughout January. Stock levels peaked at 22% of businesses in the wholesale retail trade industry, seeing their stock levels above normal during a similar period in December, following the end of the EU transition period. Again, this could be a result of the industry overstocking in anticipation for EU exit, or could be a result of low demand in response to lockdown restrictions or seasonal change. BICS results indicates that businesses who have exported or imported in the last year are more likely to have higher stock levels than those who don't export or import. Wave 29 data shows, on average, 15% of businesses who export or import reported stock levels were higher than normal, compared to only 6% of businesses who did not export or import. The end of the EU transition period meant that all commercial goods entering Northern Ireland from Great Britain would need to be customs declared. BICS introduced questions in Wave 22 measuring the movements of goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. However, these results only focus on Wave 28, and some caution should be taken again when interpreting the results, as based on the specific routing of these questions means that only a small number of businesses have responded. In Wave 28, of businesses that were currently trading, they were asked whether they had sent goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland in the last 12 months, of which 6% said yes. Of these businesses, 48% had sent or intended to send goods during the period 22nd of March to the 4th of April, and 83% reported that their main route they used for sending goods was directly Great Britain to Northern Ireland. The majority of businesses that sent or intended to send goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland during that period had not made any changes to their main route for sending their goods at 93%. The figure on the screen shows how the volume of goods being sent from Great Britain to Northern Ireland has changed during the period 22nd of March to the 4th of April by businesses who reported they had sent or intended to send goods in that period. 31% of these businesses reported that their volume goods they had sent or intended to send had decreased. Evidence from BICS is timely, but I should emphasize that they're not official statistics. However, we can link these results to other data sources. Data from the ONS Trade March publication showed a drop in exports and imports following the end of the transition period before a small recovery in February and March. The same trend can be seen in the BICS results during the same period. Results from BICS are also nicely collaborated by the Bank of England's Agent Summary of Businesses Conditions 2021, looking at Q1, where it's quoted in the manufacturing industry that there are reports of output growth being affected by non-tariff barriers to trading with the EU, such as issues relating to customs declarations and freight, rules of origin, and product labelling requirements. The latest BICS results show that 61% of trading manufacturing businesses who reported how their exports have been affected reported additional paperwork as a challenge. This was 40% for manufacturing businesses reporting customs duties or levies as a challenge. Again, results from the summary for businesses also reported they continue to report severe disruption to the flow of goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, with BICS results reporting 34% of businesses in the manufacturing industry who sent or intended to send goods to Northern Ireland in the last 2 weeks saw the volume of goods decrease. Just to summarise everything covered today, following the end of the EU transition period, export and import challenges continued to rise in the first months of 2020, before levelling off in March. Of these businesses, identification of the end of the EU transition period as a cause of challenges was increased, whereas there has been a decrease in proportion reporting COVID-19 as their main challenge. Overall, 9 in 10 of these businesses are still experiencing some level of disruption. The latest estimates from BICS indicate that an increasing proportion of currently trading businesses who reported making changes to suppliers due to the end of the EU transition period reported using more UK suppliers, reflecting an adaptation by businesses to EU exit. With this backdrop, the continued importance on assessing impacts in the aftermath of the 24th of December 2020 agreement and the end of the EU transition period on the 31st of December 2020 is helped by the timely BICs, informing policymakers identifying growing frictions and challenges in crucial cross-border business activities between the UK and the EU. We will continue with our collaboration with all our stakeholders, updating and adding questions as requirements arise. For example, over the next couple of waves, questions will be asked for the movement of goods between Northern Ireland and Great Britain to monitor how the EU exit has impacted businesses' movements of goods in the opposite direction. Also, additional questions on rules of origin, asking why businesses do not use rules of origin to export without tariffs. I now open the floor to questions.
Thank you, Emily, for wrapping up the presentation in such a timely manner. Again, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. And we have a question from Richard Neller, I think. Richard, you should be able to ask your question now.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. That's a really interesting piece of.
Sorry, Richard, I think your mic might be a bit quiet.
Is it okay? I'll move it. There we go. So, yeah. So Emily, yeah, a really interesting piece of analysis there, and you know, and kind of confirms what many of us suspected about Brexit and the likely impacts on UK exporters. I just wondered, I mean, in many ways, your questions capture what we might think of as kind of the intensive margin, and maybe that's partly, you know, your focus on the larger firms. I just, you know, just wondered whether you, within the survey, you also ask questions about whether some firms had given up exporting because of the or importing because of the restrictions that have come into place.
What I've covered today is just a snapshot of some of the data that BICS collects. There is questions whether businesses have actually been able to export or import in the last 2 weeks at all. So some of the data that you're possibly looking for is published on the ONS website. So as I said, we've just covered a snapshot here today, but there is a lot more data available on export and importing on our publication page.
But do you get a sense of that extensive margin is important, that there are lots of firms giving up, in particular amongst the smaller exporters? That's where you would expect most of that adjustment at the extensive margin, I would have said.
So the questions for BICS are routed. So only businesses that export or imported are routed through to kind of additional questions asking them whether they have like exported or imported. And of those, not many smaller businesses do export or import. But one of the things I would like to highlight is the results are weighted. So they're weighted up to be more reflective of all UK businesses. So the results, any kind of results from smaller businesses are shown through in our headline figures.
Okay, thank you, Emily. I think Eric wants to jump in with a question.
Yeah, Emily, I'll keep my camera off for symmetry. First, I was a little bit puzzled about the word EU transition, but Richard called it what it is. So now I understand. It's I guess EU transition is newspeak for Brexit. I was also worried a little bit about the first slides limiting to only the large firms, because lots of the challenges, as we all know from the trade, that you know, it's generally large firms that do it. But the reason is that there's these fixed costs involving in trade, and especially the type of Brexit challenges that are added on are going to be extremely onerous for the smaller firms. And so again, it's my wonder if you have a way of linking this survey back to the business register to find out, and to the trade statistics to find out, do any of these firms transit into trade when they hadn't been? And does that hazard of becoming a trader, has that become lower? As well as the extensive leaving, you know, that's what Richard was asking, what's the propensity of firms to stop trading once they are? But I'd say it's the other one that's most important, firms that haven't been trading, that become traders, whether that propensity has gone down drastically, because that's where the worries are going forward. A large firm will figure out how to fill out the forms. It'll take a few weeks, but you know, once it's done, there's no damage.
I apologize if I didn't make it clear. It was only the first slide that looked at businesses with 250 more employees.
Okay.
The rest of the results on the screen were covering all business sizes. I understand your point. I'd like to say that we have asked similar questions, whether businesses have, developed goods which could be exported. So I'd like to think that we have captured that, even though I haven't presented it here today. And I apologize, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. But I'd like to think everything you have described is somehow captured in the BICS results.
Right. And the survey is linkable to the register and to the other sources of data at ONS. Is that so you can start, merging these and looking at correlates?
So the results published at the moment are broken down by industry and size band. However, you are able to request access to the BICS microdata via the Secure Research Service, and more information about that is on our publication page, where you would be able to link to other data sources. Yeah.
All right. So that's where I think the interesting things are to see, for example, if firms that are digitized have much lower challenges because they know how to do these forms without paper.
Yes, very good question.
Okay, do we have any other questions for Emily? Okay. In that case, I'll thank Emily for her presentation. I will hand over chairing duties for the last part of the Q&A to Eric, and I will share my screen. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so for context, these are some very, very preliminary results from ongoing work with two of my ONS colleagues, Anna and Josefa. And okay, so to set the scene, we're interested here in three broad questions. The first one is just to describe the business lifecycle experiences of UK firms over the last 20 years in terms of the turnover and the employment paths that they take. We're then interested in tying those to sort of the big endogenous choices that firms make over their life cycle, and we're in particular interested in the sort of costly choices that firms make, usually once or at most a few times over their lifetime. So the choice of legal form, of organizational form, of industry, of location, and so on and so forth. And then finally, we'd like to tie these endogenous choices of the firm and the resulting composition of the UK business population to the broader legal, regulatory, and economic environment. And so we think that understanding these choices matters if we want to go below the headline figures of business dynamism, productivity, and regional dispersion. And it also matters for policy. There's a renewed focus in how to get businesses to grow, concern about zombie firms, and so understanding the distribution of life cycle experiences of UK businesses is crucial for formulating that sort of policy. Before I show you an overview of the results, I think it's just important to get the terms right. We'll be talking about legal form a lot, which is the legal status as recorded in the Interdepartmental Business Register. So that's a pretty coarse breakdown. We have sole proprietors, partnerships, companies, and the catch-all company for category for other legal statuses. I'll be focusing a lot on incorporation, which is the change of legal status, usually from partnerships to companies. We'll refer to the businesses that incorporate as legal form switchers. When we say company, I'll try to be careful to really only refer to the legal status as opposed to a general term for enterprise or business. And then we're looking at 3 other decisions of the firm that are trying to capture sort of a broader footprint in the economy. Multi-site, which are businesses with more than 1 local unit. Multi-industry, which are businesses that report activity in more than 1 zip code at the reporting unit level, so that's almost certainly an undercount. And industry switchers, which are businesses that change industry at the section level at some point during their life cycle. Okay, and again, so this is very early evidence, but what we do find is a hierarchy of clusters in terms of firm choices and outcome. We see sort of in pooled regressions, very descriptively that corporations outperform other legal forms along a set of measures, most notably turnover. And then when we zoom into firms that change their legal form at some point over their life cycle and compare the change in their life cycle trajectory to firms that are similar but do not incorporate, we can see that incorporation leads to a differential path in turnover and employment growth. We notice there is a catch-up in multi-site activity, and there is differentially increased survival for those firms. And interestingly, we find both a selection effect, so the firms that do incorporate are already different before incorporation, and then a discrete change at incorporation. I think I should be careful to say that we don't interpret this as a causal effect. Clearly, the firms are selecting into incorporation, but I think it is nonetheless interesting to see how the opportunities of the firm change when they change legal status. Okay, so this is very, very descriptive. The blue line is just an average of all firms that switch to company status, that incorporate, centered around the time when they incorporate. And the red line is essentially comparison partnerships centered around the median time of incorporation. So I think it's always helpful to look at the raw patterns in the data, and we do see that there's both something different about firms that incorporate before they incorporate, and then a takeoff when they do. And most of the rest of the presentation will be centered on digging into those patterns. Okay, so before we get to the results, just a little bit by the way of background. This is work that we're doing sort of as a proof of concept currently on a random sample of 40,000 businesses, taking from an experimental ONS business spine called the Longitudinal Business Database, developed by us and colleagues, that is described in an ESCoE working paper by Sylvia Louis and others. I should say, if you're interested in this data, Sylvia gave an excellent presentation on the construction of the LBD on Tuesday at the ESCoE conference. So I would recommend, if you are interested, to go and have a look at that recording. So what is nice about the LBD is it builds a data set of the economically active business population at a quarterly frequency over a fairly long period of time, about 20 years. And so it really allows us to look into these longitudinal changes at the company level. Two more things I should say. The employment figures are mostly coming from the PAYE tables in the IDBR, and the turnover figures, again, via the IDBR, come mostly from the annual business survey. Okay, so the first concern we have is, we want to make sure that our sample is reflective of the underlying population. So we went and reconstructed a couple of the tables in that working paper I mentioned for the sample, and of course it is more variable, but the patterns are probably similar. Of course, what we are mostly interested in this part of our work is the legal status. So we plotted legal statuses, the distribution of legal statuses over time, again for the population and the sample, and again they look very comparable. Okay, so this is where the data is from, and a little bit of, by the way, of background of how representative we should think these results are. So this is a roadmap for the rest of the talk. We'll talk a bit about enterprise life cycles in general, starting with some broad aggregate patterns, and then doing some very simple cluster analysis to see how those dimensions that we find to be relevant in these aggregate patterns, how they vary together. And that motivates us to look at legal forms. And again, we're looking at broad patterns in the economy first, and then dig in a little bit more by way of regressions. And then finally, what we do is we look at firms that at some point over their life cycle switch legal status, and we try to disentangle sort of the selection effect from the incorporation effect for those enterprises. Okay, so let's start with the enterprise life cycles. I think there are a couple of interesting patterns in the UK economy over the last 20 years. One is the rising number of companies. That's the red line on the left. We also, since 2006, see a decrease in the number of industry switchers. And the last thing I would draw your attention for in the left panel is just the small number of multi-industry and multi-site firms. Although again, our measure of multi-industries is most likely an undercount. I mean, in terms of the outcomes, we see since 2008 an increase in the lifespan of businesses, and we saw a recovery in employment and turnover since 2008, but there's sort of this widening divergence that we observe. So we've split the data every which way, but ultimately, we think of a lot of these variables, multi-site, multi-industry, the choice of legal form, as choices that are potentially complementary. And so we wanted to look at them together in the data. And to do that, we're doing some very simple clustering analysis. So by way of a k-means function, we're clustering on turnover, employment, age, company status, and multi-industry and multi-site status. And on the right hand, you can see the fall in the within cluster residuals, and it tapers out fairly quickly. I'll show you the results, I think, for 5 clusters, but whether it's 4 or 6, it doesn't make a huge difference. So here are the clusters that we do find ordered by average turnover. I think the first thing to note is just in the number of businesses in each cluster, there's sort of this very strong hierarchy. We find a lot of observations, and again here we're treating every quarter firm observation separately. We've also looked at clustering by initial status or final status of each company. Doesn't seem to make a huge number of difference. So we see at the very bottom this large number of very small firms. They are not usually companies. They are not engaged in multi-industry or multi-site activity. And then at the other end of the hierarchy, we have this small number of very productive firms, almost all of them companies, most of them multi-industry, almost all of them multi-site, and a surprising number of them in industry switchers. So if we're looking beyond the static patterns to sort of the dynamics between the clusters, I think the first thing we want to say is that the number of firms that change from one cluster to another is very small. The second interesting pattern is that there seems to be this step ladder where the flows we do observe is usually upgrades into the next higher cluster, and then we also see this absorbing state, in this large cluster of relatively small firms. It'll be interesting to see how that ties to this literature on zombie firms. Okay, so motivated by these patterns, but also by an existing literature that spans corporate finance, economic history, and law and economics. Happy to talk about this in the Q&A if people are interested. We've dug in a little bit more into the patterns by legal form. I think the first thing to note is that there's huge variation across industries in the distribution of legal forms, which is sort of consistent with this existing literature I mentioned that sees legal forms as solutions to particular competitive challenges and industry configurations. Now, this is the number of companies, the number of businesses by legal status. If we look at if we look at legal status by revenue or by employment, the two figures on the right, you can see that companies really dwarf all the other legal forms. So companies are just much bigger on average, or at least some companies are very big and make up a lot of the revenue. Okay, so then to take this just a little bit further, we control for industry age and quarter, and essentially run a pooled regression to see how legal statuses are correlated with what we think of as outcomes. So here I'm showing you turnover, employment, and whether the business is continuously active or deactivates and reactivates at some point. And again, we show. So this is the omitted category here is sole proprietorships, but if you compare it to partnerships or other legal statuses, so we see this pronounced turnover effect. The employment is a lot more variable. I think one thing that we want to dig in a little bit deeper is sort of this change in the firm landscape somewhere between 2006 and 2009. 2006 is the introduction of the Companies Act, which makes it a lot easier for small businesses to incorporate. But of course, any effect that we find will be confounded by the financial crisis and the aftermath. So what we've done here is just split up the sample in before and after 2006, and looked at some other potential choices that are correlated with legal form, like multi-site activity or multi-industry activity. And the patterns are fairly similar. What's interesting is that the survival probability or the differential survival probability for corporations is much larger after 2006. Okay, so these patterns in the data are interesting, but we really want to get a little bit more at something like an incorporation effect. And I don't think we're interested necessarily in sort of a average treatment effect, because I think we recognize that legal form choice and these other choices that we're investigating are part of the firm's choice set, and as such, we're not interested in a random firm being pushed into a different legal form, but we want to see over the lifetime of a firm, as they incorporate, how does that affect their outcomes. So again, this is just the descriptive pattern on average for the switchers that I've shown you before, and we'll want to dig into that a little bit more. So what we've done is, controlling for firm, time, and industry fixed effects and some controls. We're looking at a set of dummy variables that denote how many years out from, how many quarters out from incorporation these businesses are. And this is based on a recent and excellent AER paper by Amanda Gregg, who looks at establishments in Imperial Russia and finds that, similar to what we find here, there is sort of a selection into incorporation. So businesses, in her case, manufacturing establishments in Russia already look different before they incorporate. But then once they do incorporate, there is this pronounced and discrete change. So without further ado, these are our results for turnover and employment. I mean, as you can see, even before incorporation, switchers are different. But then their turnover jumps discretely and keeps increasing for a number of quarters, and the same is true for employment. We also see that switchers have higher survival probabilities than comparable firms, and this, again, there might be a bit of a difference before, but even so, we do see a jump. We do see a jump after, and interestingly, switchers seem to be actually doing worse in terms of multi-site activity before the switch, but then we see this catch up over time. We don't see any effect on multi-industry activity, but again, our measure of multi-industry activities captures only a small number of firms. Okay, so let me slowly sum this up, and then we can open up the floor to questions. So what we're doing in this project is, starting from these broad patterns in the data, we're trying to take advantage of the linked microdata to identify the effect of legal form choice, and in particular the effect of incorporation. As I said, we're not looking for a policy experiment or anything. We're interested in mostly just describing the impact of the endogenous choices that firms are making. And what we find, what I've shown you here, is that there is a hierarchy of distinct clusters of firm choices and outcomes that are fairly stable, and within which choices are fairly strongly correlated. We also see, when there are flows, they tend to respect this hierarchy. I've then shown you that corporations sort of across firms seem to be doing better in terms of a variety of outcomes, including turnover and survival. And when we look at firms that incorporate at some point over the life cycles, the legal status switchers, we find that, while there is a selection effect, so switchers are already different before they incorporate, there does seem to be sort of a discrete step change after they incorporate in terms of turnover and employment growth and survival rates. So just to preview what else we have planned on this work, is our immediate priorities are to get a better handle of how these patterns are changing with changes in the regulatory, legal, and macroeconomic environment. We'd also like to link the data to the local unit level to refine our measurements of multi-industry. And then in the wider project, I think the two interesting puzzle pieces that we'd like to investigate is the role of asset accumulation in this process of incorporation. And again, this relates to this existing literature that says, that finds that one of the reasons businesses incorporate is to get access to capital that they don't otherwise have access to in order to finance expansions. And secondly, we'd like to look or dig a little bit into the role of acquisitions, which might you know, be biasing our results if what we in the LBD see as business deaths is actually a mixture of true business failures and the acquisition of successful businesses by larger businesses, which again is something that the literature has noted in other contexts. Okay, and with that, I'm happy to open the floor for questions.
All right, Jacob, thank you very much. So let me hereby open the floor. I have a question by Thomas Treeps, and could you, can I unmute you? Let's see.
Yes, thank you, Eric. Thank you, Jacob. So the question is very simple. I don't know the details of the Companies Act, but just listening to your explanation, it sounded you might actually use that for a better causal identification.
Yeah, exactly. So that's something we want to explore. Although, of course, the complication there is that just a few quarters after that, the introduction of the Companies Act, we have the financial crisis of 2008, and so we'll have to think carefully about how to disentangle the effects. But that's definitely something we want to look into. Thank you, Thomas.
All right, let's see if I see some other hands go up. All right, well, let me throw one in for a second. Yeah, I do think that the selection issue is large. You know, people buy diapers and then they get kids. Firms become a company, and then they start investing like crazy. And it, you know, so I think you're going to need to go down and look at all the, you know, there's the limited liability, there's the differences in taxation regime, there's the ability of getting external financing. And then probably there are some things in terms of the types of business to business relationships you can have that are easier when you're a company than not. So somehow you're going to have to start disentangling these things. So I like your approach of trying to, for example, tie in within the investment data. You would certainly expect someone, after incorporating all of us, or before starting to do large outlays on physical assets or intangible assets, they would incorporate. And you know, you certainly be careful about calling it causation. So somewhere there's a question here. I was puzzled about the.
Sorry,
about
can I?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Can I just? I absolutely take your point, and I think it's, in general, we don't want to see legal statuses as these sort of monolithic units, but want to dig into you know, the various aspects that make up those legal choices, and we're trying to get better legal status data to at least disentangle between limited and partnerships and partnerships. But I do think we'll probably have to get a lot more familiar with the corporate codes to maybe use some smaller changes to get at this a little bit. So point well taken.
So here's a question on the survival of the switchers. So one is, so I don't quite see the experiment. Whom are you comparing to whom? One thing I could imagine doing is comparing the survival of non-incorporated firms with the previously non-incorporated firms who incorporate. And the other one is comparing the survival rate of the newly incorporated firms with the previously incorporated firms. So there's two experiments you should run. I'm not sure exactly which one you did, what the dummy was capturing, whether it was everyone's survival. So I think those are two separate things. And given that incorporating makes you limited liability, I would probably expect that those firms that were unincorporated and become incorporated are doing so because they want to undertake higher risk activities. And so therefore, probably their survival rate should be lower than those that decided not to incorporate. So one of the reasons you want to incorporate is to limit the downside and take risks.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point, and I think this is where I'd really like to see partnerships split into limited partnerships and unlimited partnerships to take that risk aspect out. I think my understanding from the existing literature in law and economics and economic history is that what people find is there's at least some evidence that entrepreneurs will try out ventures in legal forms that are easier to dissolve, and if the draw of the technology or whatever they get is sort of good enough, then they will upgrade to a more stable legal form. And I think what would be really interesting for that is if we could get data on company directors to sort of look at this issue of serial entrepreneurs. So it might well be that we need to see a few failed ventures to see a company that then really goes and grows.
Yeah, I was surprised in that in your cluster 1 compared to cluster 1 and cluster 2, the turnover to employee, I guess revenue per worker, was vastly different. Cluster 1 had higher turnover and much lower employment than cluster 2. And is that because those are high in intangibles or high in human capital? Is that?
Yeah, so we can't really tell with the IDBR data, but that's precisely why we would like to bring in asset data. I think that difference is one of the ones that I found most fascinating in the patterns we've seen in the data.
Let's see, other questions coming here. Otherwise, I'll have one more before people can go to their virtual coffee. So given that the tax regimes across different legal forms and the bankruptcy regimes across different legal forms and the financial ability of financing across legal forms varies across country, do you think that this type of study done in a cross-country context allows you identifying the separate effects, the risk and bankruptcy, the access to finance, and the tax benefit channels by identifying across countries?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are other things varying too across countries, but when you were talking about your data infrastructure, I I had more than one thought going in that direction. So I think that's, especially given how little these regimes change over time, I think bringing in cross-country variation would be a potentially very fruitful direction.
I'm trying to suck you in. All right. I guess you're the chair of the whole session, so you can decide whether to end this here and now, or whether to try to list something else.
If there are no other questions, then I think we can give people some of their time back, and so I'll just like to thank everyone, of the presenters, of course, but also the audience. And there is a chat function afterwards if people are interested, and of course you can get in touch with the presenters directly as well. So thank you, Eric. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, everyone else.